นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening to you all. As you may be aware, I'm talking here from a hotel room in central Adelaide. And it brings up coming into hotel quarantine, having come back from the UK, it brings up a number of reflections for me personally. If you go into a quarantine, it's a time of confinement, isolation, limitation. And that's a situation that you may not want or may not choose yourself. It's required by law, but it's not your personal choice really. But it brings up the challenge of, well, can you find contentment within the situation? Those kind of reflections. And I think everyone will have different situations in their lives that are similar, whether it's being confined by illness, physical ailments, disabilities sometimes, feelings of confinement within one's lifestyle, say like one's job, and one's family situation. It could be physical confinement sometimes like this, you're stuck in a room, you can't leave for some reason. All kinds of times in our life when we're in a situation where maybe our mobility is limited, or our access to things we like and want or people is limited. It's not unusual for us to face confinement and isolation from time to time through our life. So these are good occasions to learn from. One thing you learn from practicing what the Buddha taught is that any kind of problem, difficulty, any kind of suffering is a place to learn. If you think about it, this month we're celebrating Wesak or Visakha Puja, the full moon of May when the Buddha was enlightened. What makes the Buddha enlightened? Suffering. So in that sense, whenever you do face a situation where perhaps your level of suffering or the challenges, the difficulties of life are increased, it's a time, in one sense, to give thanks, because suffering can become the cause for enlightenment, even the enlightenment of the Buddha, or for our own enlightenment, our own growth in understanding, in the practice, the growth of wholesome mental qualities that will lead us to the end of suffering. They grow out of the challenges of meeting with suffering, problems, difficulties. So I always find in these situations, it's a good starting point, how to deal with a new challenge that is bringing you some problems, some difficulties. See it that it can be a growth, a cause for growth in wisdom and understanding, a growth in yourself as a human being, a challenge, something to learn from. And this is something I've got from Luang Por Chah, having been a student of his for almost 40 years. Ajahn Chah had that approach that everything is teaching us in life. Everything is a teaching. Whether things are going well or things are going difficult, you're healthy or you're ill, people like you or they don't like you, your work is going well or you lose your job, everything is a teaching. And of course, we don't want difficulty. We don't want to have to face more difficulties and challenges in life. But we can't really avoid it, can we? They come along due to different causes and conditions, which are often outside our control. So if they do come, well, why can't we use them to our advantage and learn from these situations? And to see one way to learn from these situations is to see, can we find contentment with the situation that has arisen in our life? It doesn't always mean to accept something that needs to be fixed just passively and give up on it or give in, but it's finding the contentment within the limitations of that situation and finding a way to mentally adjust, to reflect on it, to learn from it. And if you still need to make other adjustments, to act, to make decisions, to do things to change what's arisen, to fix the problem, well, of course, that may be part of it as well. But the best way to fix problems is from a place where your mind is feeling content and accepting and at peace with what's happening, even if it's something unpleasant. So, for example, me coming into quarantine here in Adelaide, you come into a hotel room. Already as a Buddhist monk, I can find contentment in a hotel room because I say, oh, this is nice. This is bigger than my kuti. It's got a bathroom. It's got all mod cons. They bring me my food every day. I don't have to go worrying about where's my food coming from. There's a certain amount I can be content with on the level of just material well-being. And this is a reflection the Buddha gave us, not just for monastics, but for lay people as well. Like something you could reflect on every day. You have a roof over your head, I hope. If you're watching this on some device, a computer or a phone, it probably means you've got enough wealth, enough material support that you've got a roof over your head. You're not struggling. You've got food, I assume. If you can buy a computer or a phone, you've probably got enough money to buy your food. So you've got food, you've got shelter. When I look at the Zoom meetings, I see everyone is wearing clothes. So you've got clothing. And I assume you've got access to some medical care. I don't know what level it is on, but I'm sure there's some medical care available for you if you get ill. I have medical care available for me. I have too much. They ring me up every day to check on me to see how I am and if I have the symptoms of COVID. And if that I do, there'll be doctors and nurses rushing in here straight away. So I'm not worried about my health care in this confined situation. But all of us, we probably all have at least a modest level of material wealth and support in our life. That is a beginning point of practice, isn't it? Just getting the basics of life sorted, having food, shelter. Once you've got that started, you can find some contentment. And this is an important reflection in our life. And one of the roles of monks and nuns is to remind people that you don't need a lot to be content. You don't need a lot of food, different choices of food, accommodation, and so on. Just the basic is really good enough for a human being. If you have more than the basic, well, fine. If you've got the merit, the good karma for that, good. But we can also learn to appreciate the simple things in life and the simple material wealth that we can find so far. This is good. This is good enough. This is what we need to practice the Dhamma, isn't it? Say to practice meditation, if you didn't have any shelter or you weren't able to get food, if you're really struggling, in real deep poverty, then of course that would be an issue for you. It would be very difficult to sit and meditate if you were hungry or thirsty or had nowhere to stay. So that's, you might say, one of our first priorities as a human being is just to attain the basics, the basic necessities of life. And the Buddha encouraged us to do that. He didn't say just live in absolute poverty, but accept that we only need a certain level, maybe. Try and find contentment within what you can find, the level of wealth, the level of income, and so on. try and find contentment within that, because that will free your mind up, free the energy of the mind up then for pursuing the spiritual life, practice of meditation, listening to Dhamma, and so on. You see, with our current, the way the world is now, we're a consumer society, and we love to always be looking for more, to get more um, of the good things of life, more pleasures, so more pleasurable experiences through our eyes, our ears, nose, tongue, with the body. We're always looking for more, and unwittingly we become caught up into discontent because of that. And everything in our society is supporting the search for better things, more things, new things, bigger things, brighter things, and so on. Ajahn Chah used to say, the way the world is developing economically, the world is becoming brighter, meaning there's more power, more electricity, more technology, but people's hearts are becoming darker, because the temptation is to always get attached to that kind of conveyor belt mentality of consumerism, where we're always looking to buy more, get more, earn more money to achieve more wealth, get more things, thinking that will make us secure and happy, but not seeing how it actually promotes a lot of discontent within us. So for me, it's a good practice coming back into hotel quarantine. In a way, I'm a veteran. I did it last year for 2 weeks, so I knew what I was getting into. So I'm now in this hotel room in Adelaide, and I'm just learning to be content with the four walls, the ceiling, um, and the limitations of the situation. How can I learn to practice for 14 days in quarantine? And because I am a veteran of it, I've done it before, I don't think it's going to be that difficult. So far, it's been relatively okay, because of my monk's training helps me with that. But really, as lay people, you have to learn in the same way. You may not have to experience hotel quarantine. I hope you don't. But as I said, we all have limiting situations in our life. And attitude is everything, isn't it? The Buddha encouraged us to develop skillful attitudes towards the suffering, the challenges that we face, and to develop our mind to meet them, develop the qualities of the mind. And that's what the Buddhist path of practice is all about. Developing sila, moral conduct that brings us a sense of inner ease and happiness, because we're not trying to harm or blame other people or attack other people for what we're experiencing. Develop the mindfulness and the right effort, so that we're looking after our mind and trying to let go of the negative thoughts and suffering that comes up, and develop the more skillful thoughts, so that we can develop states of calm and wisdom. This is what we're aiming to do within the situations that we find in our life. So sometimes you may even say it's good to have a few challenges, because then you really see the suffering of life, and then you can grow from the suffering, if you treat it as a teaching, you treat it as something to learn from. Of course, we don't always do that. Sometimes we just get caught into our negative, complaining mind very easily. It's a habit. The untrained mind loves to complain, find fault, see what's wrong, and just fixate on that and dwell on that. So for me, I have to watch myself. I come into hotel quarantine and I could start complaining. Oh, they're not treating me very well. I might not like the food or the place, or I might just feel constrained by the place. No fresh air, no chance to walk outside, in no nature. But at the same time, I can also appreciate other things to counter that negativity. I can bring up mindfulness, catch the complaining mind, and maybe turn it to see the positives and the better side of my experience. So, I'm looked after. It's a reasonable place. I could complain. I could say, well, last year I had a hotel room. I could walk 12 paces of meditation, walking meditation from the wall to the door. So I was very lucky. This year I can only walk 10 paces because it's a smaller room. So I could fixate on that and just think, oh, this hotel is not as good as last hotel. But that would be just causing myself suffering and unnecessary stress out of nothing. It's a hotel room. It's good enough. So I'm learning to develop contentment within this situation, rather than writing a letter to the owner of the hotel and say, your room is too small. I don't get to walk as much meditation as I do in the hotels in Melbourne. That's often our reaction, isn't it? When we don't get something we want, or something's not as good as we would like, we want to complain and find fault. At the very least, in our mind, we start to complain, grumble, and maybe it leads on to action as well. So we write letters of complaint, or we say something and do something out of the complaining mind. But that's suffering, isn't it? We're creating suffering or adding that suffering onto our situation, whether it's at home, work, whether it's to do with our health, whether it's to do with the world. How many people have complained about COVID virus and the pandemic? And really, there's nothing you can complain about, because it is what it is. There's no person behind that. If there is any person, you have to really blame yourself, because it's our own individual karma that we're living in the world at this time. And if we have to face some difficulty because of COVID, well, it's our own karma for being born as a human being. They used to ask Ajahn Kalyano, why do I have to suffer in life? And he would answer, because you were born. Whose fault is it that you were born? Well, really, it's your own. People often get it wrong, don't they? They're born and then they start blaming their parents and think, well, their parents aren't good enough, or they're not rich enough, or this is wrong, that's wrong, and blame their parents. Or their siblings is another one. Everything's good, but my brother makes trouble, or my sister makes trouble, or this cousin or that cousin. So often we're born into the world and we quickly start to find fault with everything around us. But why are we here? Well, we wanted to be born. This is one of the advantages of having the Buddha as a teacher, in his wisdom and the special knowledges he got from his meditation. And many other meditators have verified this as well. This is not the first time we've been born. Our stream of consciousness has been born many, many times. And in our previous existence, we had the desire for life, for continued becoming, continued birth. We haven't reached Nibbana yet. So we volunteered to be born. We wanted to be born. We wanted this. You might say, I don't want COVID pandemic. I don't want all the problems of the world, but you do, because you wanted to be born, and it comes as a package. Perhaps at the end of this life, somebody, an angel of mercy could come along and say, do you know your desire for future birth? Once you're dying, no one wants to die. Everyone wants to be reborn and in a better place, a happy place. Okay, good. But then the angel of mercy should come along and say, you know what you're letting yourself in for? Maybe they give us a little brochure, a packaged brochure of what next life's going to bring. And what's it going to bring? More old age, more sickness, more death, more problems, more hotel quarantine, more people that we don't get on with, more illness, more this, more that. It's a package, isn't it? When you're born as a human being, there must be some suffering coming your way, and there's no way around it. So the wise person, nobody likes suffering, but the wise person says, well, this is part of the package. I'm going to learn from it and see what I can do to minimize it, of course, reduce it, and ultimately get beyond it. And why can we say that? Well, because we're lucky. We've got a Buddha, the best teacher the world has known. That the truth that the Buddha pointed to was that there is a way out of suffering. There's always a way out of suffering, and not even a way out that is way off in the distance future, next life, next realm of existence that we're going to be born in. No, 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 no. You can get out of suffering right here, right now, today. The Buddhist path won't take away all the world's problems. It won't remove every bit of suffering from your physical experience of being a human being, living in the world with other people and pandemics and economic problems, etc., etc. It won't remove all that, but it will give you the right attitudes, the wisdom, and the skills to learn from it. And this is why the practice of contentment is such an important theme, coming back to our daily life and our state of mind. Can we find contentment within what we've got right now? And if you're at the point where you can sit down and meditate, like just now we sat down meditating for 15 minutes, that's a sign that you've already achieved a certain level of contentment, because you obviously have a place you can meditate. You have this ability to hear the Dhamma, communicate through technology. You have a safe, secure place, secure enough that you can sit down, practice meditation. You've already achieved a certain level of contentment. And that's the starting point, isn't it? Just reflecting on that, pausing, taking a moment to say, well, I'm still healthy enough, alert enough to hear Dhamma. I have a safe, secure place I can meditate. I already have enough to practice the Dhamma. That's a blessing. That's my good fortune, my good karma, you could say, or my good fortune. That's something we can find contentment in. Of course, our mind is still not fully trained. We still have suffering. We have greed, anger, delusion, worries, fears, of course. But we have at least achieved this much in our life. And that's something to be happy with, to find contentment in, because that settles the mind very quickly, doesn't it? If you can be content with your dwelling place where you live, your home, your apartment, your work, your family members, the people you live with, or if you live on your own, like me, I'm living on my own, to find contentment within that, then already you're like a step up in training the mind and finding inner happiness and true happiness, lasting happiness. So sometimes we have to think about these things. Contentment is not necessarily something that just happens. Sometimes it does, but actually it has to be developed, and partly through just wisely reflecting on what we have, what we've achieved, what we've got, and what we need, what we really need. So any of you who've been on retreats in monasteries or retreat centers, you know that there's this reflection. We wisely reflect. I eat my food. I use my dwelling just as a place to sleep and rest and practice. I use my clothing just to keep me warm, protected from the weather. You probably heard some of these wise reflections that the Buddha gave already, and you may be familiar with them. And if you come back to them as a simple reflection, it can very easily bring up a sense of ease and contentment in your daily life. Because how often is suffering and stress based around finding fault with what we got rather than finding contentment? So it's a very good starting point whenever you are faced with a new difficult situation. Maybe just a simple reflection. How can I find contentment within this situation, with this person, with this level of wealth or this level of comfort that I have, or with whatever is going on in my life at this moment? Can I find contentment within it? Of course, that doesn't always remove problems, but it is just changing your attitude so that you have this kind of softness of mind and some positive thinking, some good thinking, so that then you can further learn and practice within that situation. Today, like as part of my hotel quarantine experience, I get rung up many times a day by hotel staff, South Australian police check on me, and then the nurses ring up to check on my COVID symptoms or lack of COVID symptoms. And then also mental health carers ring up to see how you're doing mentally, because some people find it very difficult being in quarantine. And then today I had quite a long conversation with a mental health carer, and she was running through a questionnaire asking me about my mental health and how I was. And luckily I could answer in a fairly positive way. But one of the questions was, do you feel nervous, or have you felt nervous? And I thought, oh, that's an unusual question. People don't usually ask. So I thought, no, there's no tigers around here, so I'm okay. I don't feel nervous. Because I was thinking, when is the last time I felt nervous? As many years ago, probably in the forest, when you're in a forest with a wild tiger howling around and moving around, and you're not sure what's going to happen. You feel a little bit nervous. And that's a long time ago. So I said, no, I haven't felt nervous for a long time. Because in hotels in Adelaide, there are no tigers. So I can at least be happy on that level. I'm in a hotel, it's safe. The police are right outside my door, it's safe. I've got food, I got everything I need, and there's no tigers, so I don't need to feel nervous. And I imagine where you're living, unless you're tuning in from the forests of Asia, literally being in the jungle, I imagine where you're living, there are no tigers there either. So that's one less thing to worry about. One thing you can be content and happy about. You're in a safe, secure place. You can practice the Dhamma. I'm making a joke of it, I know. Of course, sometimes people do have very unpleasant challenges and difficulties in their life. Maybe no tigers, but maybe difficult people is a very common one. I understand that. But what I'm doing is just giving you a way of reflection in a situation. If you're ever facing difficulties or a challenging situation, can you find the good in that situation? Can you learn from that situation, which is how you find the good in it? Um, the Buddha encouraged us to question, to look at things from different angles, to use our intelligence, and we all have intelligence, to learn to look at our experience from different angles, to question our thinking, question our views on things, our beliefs, our opinions, how we're reacting to things, not just to follow along blindly, because that's the cause of delusion, isn't it? You know, the Buddha encouraged us to establish mindfulness and then reflect wisely on what's going on, whether it's something as simple as, you know, the food you eat, or the place you live, or things that are more complicated, but, you know, developing calm in your meditation and then reflecting on the arising and passing away of thoughts and feelings and sensations. You know, we practice on many levels, but the Buddha encouraged us to develop this ability to question and learn from our experience, to investigate what is what, and not to become dull or just accept things as they are or as we believe them to be, without checking first, without questioning. So as you practice meditation in particular, but also as you just practice more generally, practice the Buddhist path, it may be a habit you pick up on. You know, having established contentment, then you start looking on a deeper level at where suffering arises and questioning some of your own thoughts and opinions, and some may turn out to be wise and true and based on something that's very useful to you, useful insights. But then some may be based on imagination or fantasy or just reactions. And we probably all know what that's like when we get caught into a mood of discontent or anger or worry. But to question, to look, to learn. And the Buddha praised this. And we're all aware of the Buddha's teaching to the Kalama people, where they were in big problems because they had so many different teachers coming by, teaching them slightly different meditation methods and different philosophies and different ways of looking at life. They found it a bit confusing. And they came to the Buddha and said, well, we have this problem. We're questioning and doubting everything because so many teachers seem to contradict each other, and some speak from the text and some speak from their experience, and some say you should believe this, some say believe that. And the Buddha said, well, ultimately, you know, he guided them through a method of learning how to establish views on your experience based on wisdom, based on understanding. And you know, the bottom line was the Buddha said, well, you have to really prove and learn for yourself from your own experience. And a teacher can help. You know, the Buddha and other teachers certainly have helped us, but all they can do is point you in the direction, but you have to do the investigation and come to see what you've heard first, maybe, and you've reflected on. You actually got to get to the point where you're seeing it and knowing it from your own experience. Then you can believe it. And that's the way the Buddha encouraged us to practice, is to be willing to question, willing to learn from our experience, even when, you know, things are difficult or painful or unpleasant. You notice when we do experience suffering, at that moment, our mind becomes very narrow, very fixed in its view, very narrow, and its first reaction to suffering is usually, I don't want to know this, I don't want to experience this, I don't want this. So we become caught up in the stress of it, anger, fear maybe, and we don't reflect, we don't question, we don't learn from that experience. So we have to help ourselves. We have to give ourselves the right instructions and right encouragement. And many people say this, just the practice of meditation itself already that brings up a bit of fear, trepidation. They're worried, oh, meditation sounds difficult to me. My mind is not peaceful. My legs hurt. I don't want to do it. It sounds like suffering to me. So they avoid that suffering and never benefit from, the training and the practice of meditation. And that applies to many things in life, isn't it? We often, we think something will bring us suffering, so we pull back. We don't want to experience it. We don't want to learn. And so we kind of stay narrow, stay limited, and often are not growing where we could grow. And the Buddha didn't encourage us to go out and look for suffering and make suffering up, unnecessarily. But what he pointed out is it is a part of human existence. There will sometimes be unpleasant experiences, painful experiences. It comes as part of being a human being. So rather than run away from it, deny it, fear it, try to learn from it. If it's something that's happening that you can't avoid, why not learn from it and raise your mind to a higher level from it? And you can see how, particularly in the practice of mindfulness, wise reflection, in meditation, but just generally practicing the Buddhist path, over time you probably gain experience, don't you? If you've meditate, say a meditation retreat is a good example. If you've never done a meditation retreat, often you think, oh, this is difficult. It sounds like a lot of trouble. I'm not going to be able to have any. I'm not going to talk to anyone much. I'm going to be sitting and walking meditation. Sounds like it might be painful, and I have to have a lot of discipline. I won't sleep enough, and blah, blah, blah. Your mind already starts to bring up all kinds of fear, anxiety, which may even stop you doing the retreat. But if you've got up the courage to do the retreat, then you're doing it. Usually you learn, especially when you see other people doing it, you learn, oh, it was quite manageable. I could sit, I could walk, I could follow the routine, keep the precepts, live in that simple way for 7 days or 10 days, whatever it is. Then you've gained some experience, haven't you? And that's something that you can look back on afterwards, and it gives you strength of mind, understanding. You may well have gone through some suffering. We all have. Sitting meditation can be painful, can be difficult with a mind that is very restless or full of anger or fear. But having practiced at least once, twice, or a few times, you get to know it, don't you? You get to know what the mind is like, what the experience is like, and you learn from it. And that's wisdom. And you can see all the unpleasant experiences that you may have had on a meditation retreat. They were unpleasant, but they arose, they passed away, they weren't that bad. And you can see there's still a level of contentment, willingness to face them and practice. Having gone through them once, oh, it's not that bad. I can face this, I can learn from this. And you grow. And you can take that same wisdom and then apply it into so many other things in your life. Learning a new skill, meeting new people, dealing with family problems, going to work, dealing with people at work who you don't get on well with or provide difficulty, dealing with disease or illness or old age, all the normal kinds of suffering of human beings. They can become a basis for learning, gaining insight, and actually moving beyond if you treat them in that way. So the Buddha was encouraging this, encouraging us to learn from every time we face a bit of suffering. Don't just narrow your mind down and just hate it and make it worse by hating it and complaining or trying to escape into the imagination or into sense pleasures and so on, but also take the time to face it, to look at it and learn. And often you find things that you thought would be suffering are not as bad as you thought. The thought was the problem, not the thing. So hotel quarantine sounds bad and it's not pleasant, but at the same time, it's not that unpleasant either. I could think about it really badly and put myself in a state, but at the same time, I could realize it's just staying in a room, eating my food, doing my practice, spending my time as best as I can. Um, and I don't have to think a lot of negative thoughts about it or hold on to those negative thoughts. Going to work, you have a job, you go to work, and it's sometimes tiring, challenging. People maybe give you some trouble, maybe you make mistakes. You can think it out into a big stressful thing and make it a miserable time for yourself. Or you could learn to make the best of it if it's something you have to do, because we have to earn money, say. You could go to work and just make the best of it, look after your mind, accept the problems, accept the difficulties, but learn from them. So whether it's study, work, or health issues, and all the different suffering we can have as human beings, the old teaching is this: suffering is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn, to grow. And the Buddha himself did that. The Buddha himself went through far more suffering than any of us. And that's a reflection in itself, isn't it? When you face suffering, like say, I go into hotel quarantine 14 days. I think, oh, the Buddha did his ascetic practices for 6 years, fasting, holding his breath. He went to severe asceticism, just learning from that side of the practice to see how much a human body needs to endure. Ultimately, he realized it wasn't necessary for enlightenment, but still he made that effort and he went through all that suffering and many, many lifetimes practicing, going through difficulty in order to become a Buddha, far more than me, you, or anyone else. So you can use that reflection when you're facing a problem. You say, the Buddha went through a lot worse than this. Ajahn Chah went through a lot worse than this, or any teacher that you respect. You can reflect like that to give yourself a little bit of strength and the right attitude to face your own problems. But it puts them in perspective, doesn't it? When you think of the Buddha, your own problems shrink down from being very big, important things, serious things that are ruining your whole life or changing your life for the worst. Suddenly they shrink down to just like little grains of sand or something. You realize they're just a little grain of sand, a little blip, a little passing hiccup in life. Somebody is giving you trouble at work or in your life, or you have some health problems, you have this issue, that issue, but they're just small things. The real problem is our own mind that is not learning and using them as a vehicle to learn the Dhamma. We're not bringing up the mindfulness and reflecting on them. We're just giving into them. And when you give in to suffering, you become suffering. That becomes who you are. And you make it worse. It tends to be cyclical, doesn't it? So you keep holding on to the same old patterns of thinking, aversion, fear, discontent, desires, things you want. You're not using it as a vehicle for practice at that time. So your mind is very narrow, very self-centered, and the more we attach in that way, the more we suffer. So the Buddha was encouraging us maybe to be a little bit more courageous and treat suffering as something to learn from. The painful things in life are things we can learn from. That way already it's a little bit friendlier, a little bit better when you say, oh, this is a teaching. Some teachings are painful, I know. We just have to accept that. But treat it as a teaching. Already the mind lifts up a bit out of its attachment to the suffering, out of its more negative, dark view of things, becomes a bit brighter. It's like, oh, this is a teaching, a good teaching, a painful teaching maybe, but it's a teaching and you're learning. You gain something. What do you gain from a teaching? Well, you gain knowledge, you gain understanding. You can actually gain something from suffering. You don't have to look for suffering, but when it comes, treat it as something to learn from, and already you grow from that. So finding contentment within your life, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, the contentment to practice within your situation. So often in our life, because we got a mind that is very creative, we have an imagination that can bring out all kinds of ideas and pictures of how things should be. So often we make suffering out of nothing, or we make things worse than they need to be, simply because we have this mind that is saying, oh, this shouldn't happen. I shouldn't have to be in hotel quarantine, or I shouldn't have to put up with this difficult person, or I shouldn't be ill. That's the untrained mind that's attaching to the suffering, making it worse, saying it doesn't fit with who I think I am and who I want to be. It's not part of the package, my package, but actually, it is part of the package. It's part of being a human being. But at that moment, we get lost in the imagination that says this shouldn't be happening, and we make it worse, don't we? We complain to ourselves. If it's really bad, we complain to other people. Sometimes we even do that, don't we? We spread our suffering around. We're angry and upset with what's happening in our life and how things are. So then we take it out on other people. We somehow feel better if they can suffer as well. Then my suffering doesn't seem so bad if I can make them suffer as well. And we do that unconsciously, or occasionally we do it consciously. That might be called cruelty, but nevertheless, we do this. We spread our suffering around, thinking somehow, well, that will reduce it, but it doesn't. It tends to make it worse, more intense. Better to use the Buddha's remedy. You establish the mindful awareness of suffering, as an experience, and then it already starts to shrink down a little bit, and you can see it's an experience, but it arises, it ceases. It's not necessarily who I am. It's just one part of my experience at this time. So by bringing up awareness and reflecting on it, you're sort of depersonalizing it. It's not so intense, not so important to you. And this is a skill that you can develop through your life, learning to wisely reflect on suffering, to see suffering as suffering, the first noble truth. That helps as well. The Buddha said, when you reflect on suffering, if you're doing that mindfully, even though the experience is painful, unpleasant, you're ennobling your mind, meaning you're raising your consciousness, improving the level of your consciousness by taking suffering, whatever it may be, mental suffering, physical suffering, but making an object of mind. So now you're saying this is suffering, this is dukkha. Seeing dukkha as dukkha ennobles the mind because it puts it in the right perspective, in the right place. It makes you wiser, makes you more peaceful. And so this is why it's even possible to have peace within the middle of suffering. If you have the right attitude and you develop the skill of reflecting on it rather than just giving into it and becoming it, taking hold of it. So all our teachers from the Buddha downwards, they've all practiced in this way, being with suffering, but learning from it and reflecting on it, whether it's the pain of the body, sometimes you sit in meditation for a long time and there's pain, working with illness and injury, working with the difficulties of other people, learning to cooperate and get on with other people. There's so many of these very common kinds of experience we call suffering, but learning to make them part of the practice and finding contentment to do that, content to see suffering as suffering, accepting it and learning from it. When we're discontent, we react to it, don't we? We push it away and we run away and we make it worse. How many experiences so far in our lives, when you reflect on your life, say what's past from the day you were born till this day, we've all got memories of painful experiences, mistakes we've made, things that went wrong, accidents, injuries, uh, failures, losing jobs, losing this, losing that, separation from people we love and like. We've been through many experiences so far in our life. Can we now stop and just, if you are going to reflect on the past, we know the past is finished, you can't change it, but you can still reflect on it. Reflect on some of your previous difficult experiences and see, well, did I learn anything from that? And you might get a new perspective. We've all been through pain before. We've all been through disappointment before. Again, taking dukkha or suffering from the past in our memory as a learning experience and say, I've been through this before. It wasn't that bad. It arose, it passed away in the past. If you're ready for it, you may even project into the future and say, in the future, there'll probably be some more pain and dukkha for me as well, because I'm a human being. Even the Buddha got old and sick and had the pain and sickness of aging. Even the Buddha died. The Buddha had some people like him and praise him. The Buddha had some people who criticized him. There were periods when the Buddha seemed very successful and popular, and there were periods when people tried to attack the Buddha, even kill him. The Buddha went through all of that. So when we think about our life, we say, it's quite possible I'll have to go through some difficulty and pain in the future, but it's arisen and passed away in the past. It may be arising and passing away in the present moment. And maybe in the future there'll be some pain and difficulty that arises, but it will arise and pass away in the future as well. There's certain common characteristics, or what we call the universal characteristics that we see in our experience, and we can start to adjust our mind both to the past, to the future, but most importantly to the present moment. As you adjust your mind, the way you think, the way you look and learn from your experience, you can find peace in that, even in the midst of problems and difficulties. And rather than taking it all personally as though there's a conspiracy in the world. The pandemic world has conspired to put me in 14-day isolation in a hotel, so therefore I'm going to declare the pandemic my enemy for the rest of my life, and I'm going to be against the pandemic because it brought me some discomfort. Instead of doing that, you can just go, okay, pandemics are not the best, leads to the various problems in society, but we'll manage. Human beings learn many things. We can learn to manage with a pandemic or hotel quarantine, or if it's your illness or your relationship problem or whatever it may be, we can learn from it. We don't just have to give in to anger and negativity and complain about all these kind of faceless kinds of suffering. In the end, who can you blame for things like old age, sickness, and death? You can't. It's just part of being a human being. So the more we train our mind, the more we can see both our habits that are not very skillful, not coming from wisdom, where we do get caught into blaming, getting angry with, afraid of, wanting things we haven't got, and identifying strongly with all those different kinds of craving and desire. But we can also see these things can be let go of as well. And we can see, I can recognize suffering as just suffering, patiently, mindfully reflecting on it and then letting go. And I can find peace within even unpleasant experiences, as the Buddha has shown, as Luang Por Chah has shown. So maybe for today, I'll just leave the talk there with some reflections on suffering and contentment. And after this, we can have some time for questions.
Andamayang Dhammakataya Satu Karang Tatamase Satu Satu Satu